Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. What happens when the king of late-night TV doesn't like his own guests? Johnny Carson was known for being charming, funny, and great at his job. But behind the scenes, there were some famous people he just couldn't stand. From weird interviews to tense moments that never made it on TV, Carson had his limits, and some stars went way too far. You might think you know who annoyed him, but wait until you see who's at number 1. Let's look at the list of guests Johnny Carson wished had never sat on his couch. Lola Falana. Let's start with the Queen of Las Vegas herself, Lola Falana. Back in those days, this woman was absolutely everywhere, singing, dancing, and performing on stages all across America. She was an amazing performer who earned her title through pure talent and star power. When Falana came on The Tonight Show, she was there to talk about her incredible Vegas shows. Sounds like a perfect guest, right? Not quite. The conversation took a surprise turn when Falana started talking openly about racism and the unfair treatment she'd seen in the entertainment business. Now, Carson wasn't really known for talking about heavy social topics, and this caught him completely by surprise. But wait, there's more trouble. Fane's big show was at the Aladdin Hotel. Yes, that Aladdin. The same one that became a huge problem between Carson and Wayne Newton. Without even trying, Falana got stuck in the middle of Carson's fight with Newton. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. After that visit, Falana's invites to The Tonight Show mysteriously stopped coming. She kept doing great in Vegas for years, but Johnny's couch, that door was shut. Sometimes telling your truth comes with a cost, even when you're just being honest about what you've been through. Dana Carvey. Saturday Night Live made Dana Carvey a comedy superstar, and at first everything seemed great between him and Carson. He got those special Tonight Show spots, and Johnny seemed really entertained by the young comedian's skills. But then Carvey made a huge mistake. He turned his impression abilities directly on the king of late night himself. First came the SNL sketch called Carcinio, a mean parody where Carvey showed Johnny as a desperate old guy trying to copy Arsenio Hall's younger, cooler style. The sketch basically made Carson look outdated and trying too hard to stay popular. Ouch. But here's where it gets crazy. Carvey actually had the nerve to do a version of this impression right to Carson's face on The Tonight Show. Imagine making fun of your host while sitting in his studio on his show to his face. The confidence, or maybe the complete failure to read the room, was amazing. Carson did not think it was funny at all. The invites stopped coming. When Wayne's World became a huge hit, and Carvey could have used The Tonight Show to promote it, Carson made sure that didn't happen. For the last year of his legendary career, Johnny kept Carvey far away, proving that you don't make fun of the king in his own castle. Ed McMahon. You probably thought, wait, Ed McMahon, his own sidekick? The guy who laughed at his jokes for 30 years? Yeah, this one's surprising. But the truth is more complicated than what viewers saw on TV. On camera, Johnny and Ed were magical together. Ed's big personality and loud laugh perfectly balanced Johnny's dry humor and timing. They looked like best friends, having the time of their lives every single night. But once those cameras turned off, things were very different. The problem was simple. They were complete opposites. Ed was the life of the party, loud, friendly, always ready to hang out with anyone and everyone. Johnny, on the other hand, was super private, almost like a hermit. He didn't do the Hollywood party thing, and he definitely didn't want to get drinks after work. Many people who worked on the show confirmed that Johnny and Ed rarely spent time together outside the studio. It was strictly business. Even more shocking, Johnny reportedly told his own son that he couldn't stand Ed McMahon. That's a pretty mean thing to say about someone you work with every day for 3 decades. The weirdest part, they made it work. Their on-screen connection was so natural that nobody watching at home could tell there was any trouble behind the scenes. It just goes to show that the best work relationships don't always need personal friendship. Just mutual respect and understanding of what makes good television. Rich Little built his entire career on being like a human copy machine. He could sound like anybody. Presidents, movie stars, and yes, Johnny Carson. For a while, Johnny seemed okay with it. Little was a regular guest, and Carson would smile and laugh when Little broke into his impression during their talks. Behind the scenes, though, Johnny was keeping track. Every time Little did Carson at some nightclub or awards show, it bothered him more than he showed. See, Carson was super protective of his image and his brand. Having someone else out there doing Johnny Carson at different events felt like Little was borrowing his identity without asking. The breaking point came in 1982, when Little's Tonight Show appearances suddenly stopped. Rich claimed in his life storybook that Carson had him banned for doing too many impressions of him. The show's producers had a different story. They said Little's act just got old and boring. Classic, he said. They said situation. Here's the best part. Little eventually got his revenge in the best possible way. When HBO made The Late Shift, a movie about the crazy battle over who would replace Carson, guess who played Johnny? Rich Little himself. Imagine being banned from someone's show and then getting paid to play that person in a big movie. That's some next level irony right there. Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton and Johnny Carson started out as real friends. Newton appeared on The Tonight Show 30 times, using that platform to build his fame and become a Vegas legend. Everything was great until money and buildings got involved. In 1980, both men wanted to buy the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. When Newton's offer won over Carson's, something changed. Johnny didn't handle losing very well, and he started using his show to take shots at Newton. The jokes in his opening talk went from playful to mean, targeting Newton's looks and performance style. But Carson crossed a major line when he started making jokes that suggested Newton had connections to gangsters. That's not just making fun of someone's haircut or stage presence. That's a seriously damaging accusation wrapped in comedy. Newton wasn't laughing. The situation got so bad that Wayne Newton actually showed up at Carson's office in person to deliver a warning. Stop with the jokes or there would be trouble. Carson backed off on the meanest jokes, but the friendship was over. Newton never got another invitation to the show. What started as a work relationship and real friendship ended over a business deal gone wrong. Sometimes money really does ruin everything. Oliver Reed. If you want to see Johnny Carson completely checked out and uncomfortable, watch his interview with British actor Oliver Reed. This one was a disaster from start to finish. And you could see Johnny mentally counting how many more minutes until he could escape. Things went sideways when fellow guest Shelley Winters decided to dump her whiskey over Reed's head during the conversation. Instead of making things lighter, it just made everything more awkward. Reed kept trying to crack jokes and break the tension, but Carson wasn't having any of it. Throughout the entire segment, Johnny looked absolutely bored. Usually he'd talk with guests, laugh at their stories, play along with their energy. With Reed, nothing. Just dead eyes and counting the seconds. When Reed would make a point about something, Carson would disagree and offer his own opinion. Not in a playful argument way, but in a the audience doesn't care what you think kind of way. There was this moment where you could see Johnny fighting back a smile, and not in a good way. It was the smile of someone going through something they absolutely hated. The whole interview had this weird hostile feeling that was completely unlike Carson's usual smooth hosting style. Nobody really knows what exactly bothered Johnny about Reed. Maybe the heavy drinking, maybe the wild British actor energy, maybe just a personality clash. Whatever it was, this remains one of the most uncomfortable Tonight Show interviews ever, with Carson making zero effort to hide how uninterested he was. Charlie Callas. Charlie Callas was a comedian's comedian famous for his wild facial expressions, weird characters, and especially his incredible sound effects. He could make noises that seemed impossible for a human mouth to make. Carson loved him for it, booking Callas nearly 50 times over 2 decades. That's serious loyalty. Then came the appearance in 1982 that ended everything. Callas came out and did his routine, but this time it just didn't work. The jokes fell flat. The audience wasn't responding, and you could feel it bombing in real time. Now Carson was a master at saving dying comedy. He could turn a failed joke into something even funnier by pointing out the failure. This time, Johnny responded to Callas's struggling routine by making a whistle sound like a bomb dropping. It was his way of saying this isn't working through comedy. Fair enough. Performers understand when material dies, but Callas made a terrible mistake. He shoved Carson. He meant it as a playful response, like they were buddies joking around. But he completely misread the relationship. They were friendly on TV, but they weren't friends who could get physical with each other. Carson's response was instant and brutal. "You'll never be on this show again." Right there on live television in front of millions of viewers, Callas panicked, tried to play it off as a joke, and begged Johnny to change his mind. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence. Carson didn't budge. He meant every word. Carson hosted for another 10 years, and Charlie Callas was never mentioned again. His career continued thanks to his friendship with Mel Brooks, but he lost that Tonight Show spotlight forever. One shove and decades of goodwill disappeared in seconds. Joan Rivers. This one hurts because Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers had a real friendship. Carson didn't just book Rivers as a guest. He made her a regular guest host, letting her sit in his chair when he took nights off. Rivers credited Carson with launching her career, giving her the exposure she needed to become a star. For years, everything was perfect. Then 1986 happened. Fox offered Rivers her own late-night talk show, directly competing with Carson. This was huge for Joan, her own show, her own platform, a chance to step out of Johnny's shadow. But she made one massive career-defining mistake. She didn't tell Carson about it first. When the news leaked, Johnny found out through other people instead of from Rivers herself. He felt betrayed, blindsided by someone he trusted and supported. Carson didn't just ban Rivers from his show. He made it clear to the entire entertainment industry that anyone who appeared on her show would never be welcome on The Tonight Show. Think about how powerful that was. Carson could basically blacklist guests from appearing on Rivers' show because they didn't want to lose access to his much bigger platform. It badly limited who Joan could book, and her show struggled because of it. Within a year, she was out as host, and the show eventually became Arsenio Hall's show. Rivers tried to apologize, tried to reach out and repair the friendship, but Carson never responded. He stayed silent for the rest of his life. When he died in 2005, they still hadn't spoken. Joan publicly expressed regret about how things ended, wishing she'd handled it differently. It's one of the saddest fights in television history because it didn't have to happen. One conversation, one heads-up call before the deal was made, and maybe they'd still be friends. Instead, pride and hurt feelings destroyed a meaningful relationship. Bob Hope. Bob Hope was a comedy legend, an icon who entertained troops, dominated movies, and was basically Hollywood royalty. Johnny Carson respected his place in history, but that's about where the respect ended. Behind the scenes, Carson couldn't stand working with Hope. The problem was their completely different approaches to comedy. Carson was all about quick thinking and making things up as he went. He loved spontaneous moments, joking with guests, and finding humor in unexpected places. Bob Hope, on the other hand, relied entirely on scripted material written by his team. Every joke, every story, every response was pre-planned. Carson's head writer, Andrew Rickles, explained it perfectly. Hope depended on his writers for everything, while Johnny thrived on having real conversation. When Hope appeared on The Tonight Show, he could only answer specific questions in a specific order. If Carson went off script and asked something unexpected, Hope might give a completely wrong answer, because he was following his prepared notes. After one really painful interview in the 1980s, where Hope seemed lost and confused, Carson reportedly told his staff, "If I ever end up like that, guys, I want you to shoot me." That's how little he wanted to become what Bob Hope had turned into. Off camera, things were even worse. When Frank Sinatra organized a big fancy event for Ronald Reagan's inauguration, both Carson and Hope were asked to perform. Even though Johnny was one of the main stars and Hope had a smaller role, Bob decided to offer Carson some help. Hope tracked Johnny down and handed him several pages. "Here, I've written some lines you might like to use." Carson politely thanked him, but inside he was furious. As soon as Hope left, Johnny complained to his team. "Can you imagine the nerve of that man to think I need jokes from him?" The worst part for Carson was that he couldn't escape Hope. NBC loved Bob Hope because he still brought in huge ratings. The network had even given Hope permanent access to the studio Carson used. It was Johnny's space, except whenever Bob needed it. Hope also had the power to book himself on The Tonight Show whenever he wanted to promote his countless NBC specials. Carson's producer Peter Lasley described the torture. "We'd get a request and Johnny would go again and I'd say, 'Do you want to tell him no?' Carson knew he couldn't refuse because Hope had too much power at NBC. The final straw came during one of Hope's later appearances. Carson delivered an opening talk that absolutely killed. The audience was roaring with laughter. Bob Hope, watching from backstage, asked if he could use the recording of that audience laughter to make his own special sound better. He wanted to use Carson's success to cover up his own failing material. Carson was stunned by the nerve, but reluctantly agreed. That moment summed up everything Johnny hated about Bob Hope: the desperation, the reliance on others, the inability to succeed on his own merit anymore. Respect for his legacy, sure, but actually wanting to work with him, absolutely not. Don Rickles. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. The #1 spot goes to Don Rickles. But here's the twist. This wasn't a relationship built on hatred or real hostility. It was something much more complicated, much more entertaining, and honestly, much more fun. Let's set the scene. Johnny Carson came back from a night off, sat down at his desk, and immediately noticed something was wrong. His cigarette box, a box he'd had for years, something he brought with him all the way from New York, was broken. The wood was cracked. The piece was ruined. "What the hell happened to this?" Carson asked, genuinely upset. Before anyone could answer, voices from the audience and crew started shouting, "Rickles!" The band leader, Doc Severson, confirmed it. Don Rickles had broken it the night before while guest hosting with Bob Newhart. He'd been goofing around, banging on the desk during some bit, and accidentally destroyed Johnny's prized possession. Carson was not happy. "That's an heirloom," he said. Then someone mentioned that Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharky right across the hall at that very moment. You could see the wheels turning in Carson's head. "Can I get over there?" he asked the crew. When they said yes, Carson grabbed his broken box and a microphone and left his studio audience. A camera followed as he marched through the hallways toward the double doors with flashing red lights, the universal sign that filming was in progress. "Are they taping?" Carson asked. Then, not waiting for an answer, "I don't care if they're on the air." He burst through those doors like a man on a mission. "Stop the taping. Someone broke my cigarette box." Rickles absolutely lost it. He doubled over laughing, nervous sweat visible on his forehead as Carson stood there holding up the evidence. "They told me you broke it on the show last night." Well, Rickles could barely form words, stammering through his laughter. "You big dummy," Carson shouted. The whole thing was both hilarious and really tense because you couldn't tell if Johnny was really angry or playing it up for comedy. That was the genius of their dynamic.